you're good?
Yes.
Can't see anything.
Cedar Santorum, Tim Carney, Washington Examiner.
Hey, Tim. How are you?
I understand a lot of what you say, the blue collar stuff, but ethanol subsidy and the renewable fuel standard and export-import bank, how can the Republican Party fight for free enterprise when it supports these government interventions that prop up big businesses?
I would make the argument that I voted for the renewable fuel standard in 2005 for the same reason I support it now. We need to have robust domestic source transportation fuels in this country. And having that, the fact that we still are dependent upon foreign oil for a lot of our oil consumption in this country in a very destabilized world is not a good thing. So having that production here in America is a national security issue. Second, it's like saying that those who have both the production of the oil.
Yeah. Thank you.
I asked.
Thank you very much.
I'll stand wherever you want. I'll stand on top of that. Effective balance.
Thank you.
But having the people who control both the extraction of the product and the final sale of the product and control most of the steps in between be the decider of who gets another product, whether they can enter into this. They're not going to let it in. I mean, they're going to hold their product at the pump. So there has to be a way, if you're concerned, as I am, about the national security of our country and having less reliance upon foreign oil, to have those things. So this is not an ethical. There's some things that you do economically, that you do because of national security, and they may not be pure economics. But I think a lot of conservatives are, particularly at this time, more concerned about the national security of the country than they are about a mandate and the conservative principle of a government mandate. Government does a lot of mandates. I'm against the vast majority of them. But when it comes to the security of our country, I'm going to be supportive.
Senator, you talked a little bit in your remarks about looking at every candidate's record, really evaluating their background, and given the seriousness of the times after Harris, after Sanders, do you think some of the younger senators running for office, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, do they have that experience and credentials?
Well, I'm making that point for a reason. I mean, if you look at the people who are running for president, who are conservatives, there's no one that has any kind of substantial record of national security. Certainly no one has the record that I outlined here of someone who's been on the front line. One of the reasons Ronald Reagan was the transformational figure he was because not only was he a principled conservative and someone who fought the battles in California, the wars on limiting government and lowering taxes, which of course I have a very strong record. I never voted for a tax increase, etc. He also was someone who was well known, well respected on the issue of national security. And the Soviets knew who they were dealing with when Ronald Reagan came into office. That's not the case for anybody else in the field except me. ISIS knows who I am. I can tell you, when I did an op-ed about a year and a half ago on Iran, the Iranian ambassador responded to my op-ed. They know who I am. Why? Because I've been fighting them for a dozen years. And I think that's important. I think that's particularly important going up against a former Secretary of State at a time when people are going to be concerned about who's going to be the person that can keep them safe. Who's the person that the enemies will fear or allies will trust. And I think having the track record I have, having the vision, I've been very clear about, for example, Syrian refugees. Senator Cruz several months ago said he wanted to bring in Syrian refugees. Now he doesn't. Well, that's great. I mean, everybody can change their mind. But I think America is looking for someone who actually has a better understanding of the bigger picture and isn't going to change their mind every time an event happens. But has a clear idea that Syrian refugees were not a good idea 6 months ago or a year ago. Because we shouldn't be displacing people from the region and bringing them here to the country so they'll never go home. We shouldn't displace Christians out of the region. We shouldn't displace ethnic minorities or religious minorities. We should keep them in the area so they can return and repopulate those areas again. That was true today, it's true 6 months ago. 6 months ago, we couldn't do adequate background checks in ISIS-controlled territory or Assad-controlled territory. You can't do a background check in those situations. So why 6 months ago was this a bad idea when you couldn't do? Now everybody says, oh, you can't do background checks. You couldn't 6 months ago. That's the difference between someone with experience and someone who's going to make these mistakes that are going to make us more vulnerable to a Hillary Clinton.
So is 3 years in the Senate in the case of 5 years in the Senate and your case is reviewed, is that not enough to understand the world?
I can tell you I served in the Armed Services Committee for the first 8 years I was in the United States Senate. And I like these other candidates, didn't come to the United States Senate with a tremendous amount of national security experience. And I can tell you, it takes a while. It takes a while to digest everything that you're dealing with, not just the inner workings of the Pentagon and how to manage the military, which is part of the job of armed services, but also to understand the future threats and understand how to deal with those threats, not just in one area of the country, but in another area of the world, but all over the world. That takes time. It takes experience, and when you spend 2 of the first 3 years running for president, or 2 of the 5 years running for president, you're probably not steeped in the kind of depth that it takes to really have. And look, the other thing is just having. My first vote 25 years ago was to go to war. That was my first vote as a member of Congress. So I walked in to a different world, a post-Soviet Union world, and I've lived in that world for 25 years. That experience is something that is a great contrast with Hillary Clinton as opposed to the inexperience of some of these other candidates.
Senator, also ISIS knows who you are. Can you expand on that?
I just mention the fact I was in ISIS magazine under the title of the article was "In the Words of Our Enemy." There was a picture of me right under that title and a quote from me. So when they say the title of the headline of the article is "The Words of Our Enemy" and my picture's below it, I think you can deduce that they consider me an enemy.
Senator, you mentioned that the threat is now in any community.
They choose Donald Trump. What will that say about
I just recall that 2 months before the caucuses, I think Herman Cain was still tops in the polls, maybe beginning to fade at this point. Between then and January 1, Newt Gingrich had a rise and fell, and then I had my moment. So, you know what? I would just say this. It's a long way between now and February 1st, and lots of things are going to happen. Here's what I found out 4 years ago. I think the Des Moines Register poll a few weeks ago said that 88% of Iowans had not made up their mind for sure. If you go back and you look at the exit polling in the caucuses 4 years ago, I know for me, over 50% of the people who voted for me didn't decide till the last 5 days. And I think traditionally, 50% decide the last week in the Iowa caucuses. So the idea, and 75% in the last month. So we're not even, that's traditional. I think this is a much more confusing primary. I can tell you, I talk to a lot of Iowans all the time. And one of the things I hear, folks who supported me, people who didn't, they're all saying the same thing. It's so confusing right now. I don't know who to vote for. I mean, I like you, but I can't decide. I didn't hear that 4 years ago. I heard some of it, nothing like I'm hearing now. I think this is going to be a very, very flexible primary up until the very end. And that's why your fixation with national polls is ridiculous, because all national polls do is drive home the narrative that you folks continue to try to drive, which is there are only certain candidates, and then you just talk about them, which of course limits the pool of people that people see, and therefore that's who they end up voting for. So if you don't talk about the other candidates, there's very little chance they're going to break through. Why? Because that's all you're talking about. The chances. I wasn't 4 years ago. The point is in Iowa, people don't pay attention ultimately to those national polls. I was at 2% in the national polls the week before the Iowa caucus. 2%. And so I would just say that you're going to see Iowans do what they always do, which is get serious about these candidates, make a tough decision when the time comes, and I think you're going to be surprised again.
Senator, you called for a reduction in legal immigration in the U.S. One of the San Bernardino shooters came in on a K-1 fiancé visa. In light of the shooting, do you think there should be any visa programs?
Yeah, I think we should stop immediately that visa lottery system. I mean, that's one that both parties, many members, it was in the Gang of Eight bill. Many of the countries that are in the visa lottery are countries that have heavy radical Islamic presence, and people come in under a lottery system. I mean, it's somewhat absurd to think that we're casting a lottery out there for people in countries that have a high percentage of radical Islamists, and we're saying we can come into this country. That doesn't make any sense to me. That's something we should be able to do right away.
But those people
Stop
are vetted, though.
Well, yeah, the people are vetted. The people who committed the crime, committed the terrorist act a few days ago were vetted and cleared. That tells you about the vetting process we have.
Many of your former supporters are saying that they are anti-Cruz. How do you convince those people to vote?
Time, patience. I know you guys think that the election's tomorrow, but it's not. And what I saw 4 years ago was people saying, you know, I really like you, Rick, but I like Rick, or I like Michelle, or I like Rick Perry, or I like Rick Richmond. But here's what I know. I was always on their list. And I didn't care whether I was third, fourth, second, as long as I was on their list. And I stayed on their list, and then I had a shot. And what I think will happen is as people go through and they start looking at all the candidates, looking at the differences between the candidates on a variety of different issues. Immigration is one that separates this field dramatically. I don't think most people know most of the candidates' positions on this issue. The rhetoric doesn't match their record. And so I think we're going to see some changes, and it's going to take time, and I'm a very patient guy. I'm not going anywhere.
Does Jeb Bush have a chance in Iowa?
I'm not saying who has a chance. Look, I'm the last person you should be asking the question is who doesn't have a chance. I mean, I'm looking at about 25 people here who don't think I have a chance, so why am I asking? Why are you asking me whether somebody else has a chance? Right?
He's down further, closer to you in national polls now.
I know he's right up against me here in Iowa. Look, all I can tell you is that I know we're on a lot of people's lists, and I know people who 4 years ago got a good impression of what we were able to accomplish after we left Iowa. Went on to win 10 more states, even though I didn't win here on election night. That's a pretty good showing that we have what it takes to carry the ball, and as a conservative candidate. And the next 2 months, we're going to be reminded of that.
Last question.
Anybody else? That was the last one.
When you said you want to bomb ISIS back to the 7th century, does that mean you support carpet bombing?
Of course, we don't carpet bomb anymore. This is not World War II. I mean, Vietnam. We do very strategic bombing, and we're very precise as to the targets we hit. And we should be trying to limit civilian casualties, understanding that that's not always possible. But we should absolutely have a plan that limits the collateral damage of any type of bombing. And I didn't say this, but of course you know, that I am for putting additional troops on the ground, particularly in Iraq, to support the Kurds, arm them directly, give them the resources necessary, the tools, if you will, to be able to take the fight to ISIS. I've talked to a lot of folks who've come back from that region, and they've told me that the Kurds are great fighters. They need some support from us. The Sunni Muslims in Anbar can and will fight ISIS, but they need a much heavier presence of the United States. I think we've seen that when they're not integrated into an American unit, they tend not to fight as well. But they have historically, and I think they will again, fight if America is at their side. We're not right now, and that's one of the reasons we're not being successful. And then we have to provide some protection to the rebel forces and to the refugees in Syria and Iraq. You want to end the refugee crisis, create a stable place for the refugees to go, and the United States refuses to do that by not instituting a no-fly zone in areas to protect these civilian populations. So there's all sorts of things we can do to stop the refugees from coming and defeat ISIS. And we have to defeat ISIS by taking their land. I say this all the time. We cannot defeat ISIS by containing them. We have to defeat them by taking back their land. And as president, I would do.
Do you think we should?
Can I ask you one more thing? You talked at some length about senators and their foreign policy experience. I'm wondering, Dr. Ben Carson is also somebody who has tapped into many of the communities that supported you. I'm wondering, do you think he has the foreign policy experience to deal with this crisis?
Every candidate brings strengths to the table. Dr. Carson brings a winsome personality and a great amount of conviction and skill in the medical area, and a very folksy, common sense approach to the problems that we confront. But I don't think he would argue that his strength is on national security, and any more than I would argue that I have strengths that I just enumerated for him in the question is, who's the best person to go up, not just against Hillary Clinton, but to go up against ISIS, to go up against Iran, to go up against Russia and Putin? Who's the person that you feel comfortable can win both those battles? The one to get there, and then when you're there, the one to keep you safe. Thank you.